The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, startling Sophia Turner awake from her fitful sleep. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she bolted upright in bed, the familiar terror coursing through her veins. Dawn was just breaking over Rawlins, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed to mock the darkness within her small cabin. Another day in a life she'd never imagined for herself, another day of merely surviving. Sophia pushed aside her thin blanket and moved to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered out at the awakening town. 3 years since she'd arrived in Rawlins, Wyoming Territory, and still the place felt as foreign to her as the day she stepped off the train in 1876. The town had grown considerably, since then a proper settlement with a general store, saloon, and even the beginnings of a schoolhouse, but nothing about it felt like home. The morning chill seeped through her nightdress as she lit the stove to prepare coffee. Her father's pocket watch ticked steadily on the table, the only possession she had left of his after the bank seized their home back east. The minute hand crept towards 6 o'clock. She had an hour before she needed to open the library, the modest establishment she'd helped found with what little savings she'd brought west. "Books are the only romance I need," she muttered to herself, a mantra she'd repeated since childhood. Her mother had died when Sophia was just 10, leaving behind cautionary tales about the perils of giving one's heart away too freely. Her father, though kind, had reinforced the notion that love was a luxury they couldn't afford. Now, at 26, Sophia had accepted this truth as immutable. She dressed quickly in her high-necked blouse and practical skirt, her fingers working deftly to pin her chestnut hair into a tight bun. No nonsense, no frivolity, just as she preferred. The small mirror reflected a woman with eyes too old for her face, shadowed by experiences that had hardened her long before her time. The walk to the library took her past the general store, where Mrs. Holloway was already sweeping the porch. The older woman waved, and Sophia returned the gesture with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She continued past the blacksmith's, where the rhythmic clanging of hammer against anvil had already begun, and the saloon, mercifully quiet at this hour. She was fitting her key into the library door when hoofbeats caught her attention. A stranger rode into town, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Even from a distance, Sophia could tell he sat tall in the saddle, his shoulders broad beneath a worn duster. His horse, a magnificent palomino, moved with the easy gait of an animal well cared for despite what appeared to be a long journey. Sophia turned her attention back to the door, determined not to stare. Rawlins saw its share of drifters and cowboys. This one would likely be gone by sundown, seeking whatever it was restless men sought in these untamed territories. The library welcomed her with the comforting scent of leather bindings, and paper her sanctuary in this rough-hewn town. She lit the lamps and opened the ledger, preparing for another day of solitude, interrupted only by the occasional visitor seeking information or entertainment within the pages of her modest collection. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door creaked open, bringing with it a draft of cool morning air and the unexpected visitor she'd glimpsed earlier. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing sun-streaked hair and a face weathered by the elements but handsome in its rugged way. His eyes, startlingly blue against his tanned skin, surveyed the room before settling on her. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Hope I'm not disturbing you too early." Sophia straightened, her practiced composure sliding into place. "The library opens at 9, sir." "You're right on time," she gestured to the shelves. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" He approached the desk, boots quiet against the wooden floor. "Daniel Sinclair," he introduced himself, extending a hand that bore the calluses of honest work. "Just arrived in town. Thought I'd get my bearings by way of local knowledge." She hesitated before accepting his handshake, the brief contact sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Sophia Turner, I'm the librarian." She withdrew her hand quickly. "We have some maps and territorial guides if that would help." Daniel smiled, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that caught her breath. "Actually, I was hoping for something a bit different. Got any books on setting up an orchard in this climate?" The question surprised her. Most men who passed through were looking for gold claims or cattle prospects. "An orchard? In Wyoming Territory? Apple trees specifically," he confirmed, leaning slightly against the counter. "Been working on farms back east, saved enough to buy a plot outside town. Previous owner couldn't make it work, but I've got some ideas." Something about his certainty intrigued her. "We have a few agricultural references," she said, moving toward a shelf near the back. "Though I can't promise they'll be optimistic about fruit trees in this soil." Daniel followed, the scent of saddle leather and something clean like pine soap accompanying him. "That's all right. I've always enjoyed a challenge." There was no bravado in his statement, just quiet confidence. Sophia handed him a worn volume on territorial agriculture. "This has a chapter on fruit cultivation. It suggests the climate is better suited to hardier crops. Appreciate it." His fingers brushed hers as he took the book, and again she felt that peculiar warmth. "Mind if I sit a spell and read through it?" "That's what the library is for, Mr. Sinclair." She gestured to a table by the window. "Please, make yourself comfortable." He settled into a chair that seemed too small for his frame, opening the book with surprising care for hands so large and work-worn. Sophia returned to her desk, determined to focus on cataloging the new shipment that had arrived on yesterday's train. Yet her gaze kept drifting to the man by the window, his profile etched in golden morning light as he read with evident concentration. A cowboy dreaming of apple blossoms. It was an incongruous image that stayed with her long after he'd thanked her, returned the book, and departed with a promise to return the following day. That night, as Sophia prepared for bed in her lonely cabin, she found herself wondering about Daniel Sinclair and his improbable orchard. She pushed the thoughts away, scolding herself for such pointless speculation. Men like him came and went from frontier towns like Rawlins all the time, their grand plans withering like delicate plants in the harsh Wyoming soil. Love was just as fragile, just as doomed in such unforgiving terrain. Her mother had loved her father desperately, following him west when his business failed in Philadelphia, only to die of pneumonia during their first brutal winter. Sophia had watched her father's heart shrivel with grief until nothing remained but a hollow shell of the man he'd once been. No, Sophia Turner knew better than to plant dreams in rocky soil. She blew out her lamp and closed her eyes, determined to remember her place in the world alone but secure, untouched by the fairy tales that had destroyed her parents. Yet when sleep finally came, her dreams were filled with apple blossoms drifting down like snow against an impossibly blue Wyoming sky. True to his word, Daniel returned to the library the following morning, this time carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Morning, Miss Turner," he greeted, setting the package on her desk. "Thought you might enjoy these, baked them myself." Sophia unwrapped the package to find several golden brown biscuits still warm from the oven. "You bake, Mr. Sinclair?" She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He smiled, removing his hat. "Man living alone learns to do for himself or starve. I find cooking almost as satisfying as working the land." "Thank you," she said stiffly, uncertain how to respond to such an unexpected gesture. That's very thoughtful, just returning kindness for kindness. Your help yesterday was appreciated. He glanced around the quiet library. I was wondering if you might have any books on building irrigation systems, and so began a routine that would continue through the remainder of April and into May. Each morning, Daniel would arrive at the library with a small offering freshly baked goods, a wildflower he'd found on his ride into town, or once, a perfect apple he'd brought all the way from Colorado just to show her what he hoped to grow. Each day, Sophia found her carefully constructed walls weakening. She began to look forward to his visits, to their discussions about books and farming techniques. Despite her determination to remain detached, she found herself collecting information about apple cultivation whenever the mail coach brought newspapers or periodicals from back east. One unusually warm day in mid-May, Daniel arrived at the library later than usual, his clothing dusty from work. "Miss Turner," he began, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant, "I was wondering if you might consider riding out to see my property this Sunday. The trees I ordered from back east have arrived, and I'll be planting the first ones then. Thought it might make for a nice outing if you're interested." Sophia's first instinct was to refuse. She'd maintained her distance from the social activities of Rawlins precisely to avoid such entanglements. Yet the hopeful look in Daniel's eyes made her hesitate. "I don't ride, Mr. Sinclair," she said finally, the excuse sounding feeble even to her own ears. His smile didn't falter. "That's no trouble. I've got a wagon I use for hauling supplies. It's not fancy, but the seat's comfortable enough." She searched for another objection and found none that wouldn't reveal too much about her fears. "Sunday afternoon, then," she conceded, ignoring the flutter of anticipation in her chest. "After church services." The smile that spread across his face made her heart skip traitorously. "I'll be here at noon," he promised, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him absolutely. After he left, Sophia pressed her hands to her heated cheeks, angry at her own weakness. It was just an afternoon outing, a chance to see the countryside, nothing more. She would maintain her composure and her distance. Daniel Sinclair might be unlike any man she'd met in Rawlins, but he was still a man, and men left. They died. They broke promises and hearts with equal facility. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the May sunshine warming the earth and coaxing wildflowers from the plains surrounding Rawlins. Sophia dressed with more care than usual, selecting a blue skirt and white blouse she rarely wore, loosening her hair from its severe bun into a more becoming knot at the nape of her neck. "This is foolishness," she told her reflection, but made no move to change her appearance. Daniel arrived precisely at noon, the wagon freshly washed, his own clothing clean and pressed. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentle hand that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "You look lovely, Miss Turner," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration that brought unwanted color to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair," she replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "It's a beautiful day for an outing." They traveled east out of town, the wagon following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling grasslands. Daniel pointed out landmarks along the way, sharing stories of his first journey to Wyoming Territory and his decision to settle near Rawlins. "What made you choose this particular place?" Sophia asked as they crested a hill that offered a view of the distant mountains. There must be more hospitable regions for an orchard. Daniel's hands were steady on the reins as he considered her question. "I suppose it was the challenge," he admitted finally. "Everyone said it couldn't be done growing fruit trees in this climate, but I saw potential where others saw only hardship." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes the most worthwhile things require faith and patience. She looked away, uncomfortable with the way his words seemed to reach beyond their surface meaning. Faith can be misplaced, she said quietly, and patience doesn't guarantee reward. No, he agreed, surprising her. There are no guarantees in this life, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Before she could respond, they rounded a bend in the trail, and Daniel's property came into view. It was larger than she'd imagined, at least 40 acres of land stretching from the road to a creek that glimmered in the distance. A small cabin stood near the center, smoke curling from its chimney. Behind it, several outbuildings formed a neat cluster, and to the south, freshly turned earth indicated where the orchard would be planted. "Welcome to Sinclair Orchard," Daniel said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not much to look at yet, but give it time." Sophia was struck by the sense of permanence in his words. This wasn't a temporary camp or a quick scheme to make money before moving on. Daniel Sinclair was building something meant to last. He showed her around the property with obvious enthusiasm, explaining his plans for the orchard layout. The irrigation system he was developing to channel water from the creek, and the varieties of apples he hoped would thrive in the Wyoming soil. "These first saplings are just the beginning," he explained as they reached the plowed field. "I've selected varieties known for hardiness, but it'll take experimentation to find what works best here." Several dozen slender trees lay carefully arranged on canvas sheets, their roots wrapped in damp burlap. They looked impossibly fragile against the vast Wyoming landscape. "How long before they bear fruit?" she asked, kneeling to examine one of the saplings. 3 years for the first crop if we're lucky," Daniel replied. 5 before they are producing well." He watched her carefully. "Requires patience, like I said. 5 years." Sophia tried to imagine herself 5 years hence and found she couldn't picture it. She'd lived day to day for so long, the future a blank page she dared not fill with expectations. "Would you like to help me plant the first one?" Daniel asked, offering her a pair of work gloves. The question startled her. "I don't know the first thing about planting trees." His smile was warm. "Neither did I until I learned. I'll show you." Before she could object, he was guiding her through the process, showing her how to dig the hole to the proper depth, how to position the sapling so its strongest branches would catch the morning sun, how to pack the soil firmly but gently around the delicate roots. "Now we water it well," he explained, bringing a bucket from the wagon, "and say a prayer that it takes hold." "Do you really believe prayer makes a difference?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Daniel considered this as he poured water carefully around the base of the newly planted tree. "I believe in working hard and doing everything in my power to succeed," he said thoughtfully. "But I also believe there are forces bigger than us at work in the world. Seems foolish not to acknowledge them." They planted 3 more trees together, Sophia finding unexpected satisfaction in the work. Her hands, accustomed to the gentle handling of books, quickly adapted to the different but equally careful task of nurturing new life. As the afternoon waned, Daniel invited her to the cabin for a meal. "Nothing fancy," he assured her, seeming to sense her hesitation, "but I'd be honored if you'd break bread with me." The cabin was small but meticulously kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, though sparse, was well crafted. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on agriculture, botany, and, to her surprise, poetry and literature. "You have an impressive collection," she commented, running her fingers along the spines. Daniel busied himself at the stove. "Reading got me through many a lonely winter," he admitted. "Though I suspect my library pales in comparison to yours. Mine is the town's, not my own," she reminded him. "But yes, Books have always been my companions as well." He served a simple but delicious meal of rabbit stew and fresh bread, accompanied by dried apple slices he'd brought from his previous home. They ate at a small table by the window, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the weathered wood. "May I ask you something, Miss Turner?" Daniel said as they finished their meal. When she nodded cautiously, he continued, "What brought you to Rawlins? It's not the usual destination for a woman of your education and refinement." Sophia stared into her empty bowl, wondering how much to reveal. "Necessity," she answered finally. "My father died 3 years ago, leaving significant debts. The bank took our home in Denver. I had an acquaintance who mentioned Rawlins was growing and needed a teacher or someone to establish a proper library." She shrugged, the movement and attempt at casualness she didn't feel. "I had just enough money for the train ticket and to secure lodging for a month. The town council approved my proposal for the library, and here I am." "I'm sorry about your father," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "It couldn't have been easy making your way alone." "We do what we must," she replied, uncomfortable with his sympathy. "And you, what brings a man with dreams of orchards to the Wyoming Territory?" A shadow passed over his features. "War has a way of changing a man's perspective," he said quietly. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to the life I'd known in Pennsylvania. Worked my way west, learning farming along the way. Something about growing things. It heals the soul, I suppose." The mention of war explained much about him, the watchful alertness in his eyes, the way he sometimes seemed to be listening for sounds beyond her hearing. Sophia had met other veterans in Rawlins, had seen how the conflict had marked them. "And why apples?" she asked, steering toward safer ground. His expression lightened. "My grandfather had an orchard when I was a boy. Some of my happiest memories are of helping him during harvest, the scent of apples in the air, the satisfaction of seeing wagons loaded with fruit heading to market." He smiled, a faraway look in his eyes. "I want to create that again, but out here, where everything is still becoming." The simple honesty of his ambition touched something in Sophia she'd thought long dormant. Daniel Sinclair didn't just want to survive in this harsh land, he wanted to create beauty, to build something that would outlast him. "It's getting late," she said abruptly, rising from the table. "I should return to town before dark." If he was disappointed by her sudden withdrawal, Daniel didn't show it. "Of course. Thank you for coming today, Miss Turner. Your help with the planting means more than you know." The ride back to Rawlins was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts as the setting sun painted the plains in shades of amber and gold. When they reached the library, Daniel helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "I enjoyed today very much," he said, holding her gaze. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Sophia knew she should refuse, knew that the warmth spreading through her at his touch was dangerous. Yet she found herself nodding. "Perhaps. Thank you for showing me your farm." "Orchard," he corrected with a smile. "It's an orchard now, thanks to you." That night, Sophia dreamed not of apple blossoms, but of a man with patient hands and eyes that saw possibility where others saw only wilderness. Through the heat of June and into July, Daniel continued his daily visits to the library, each time lingering a little longer, their conversations growing deeper. He brought her the first strawberries from the small patch he'd planted near his cabin, taught her the names of wildflowers that grew on the prairie, and slowly, despite her resistance, became the person she most looked forward to seeing each day. On Independence Day, the town of Rawlins organized a celebration in the newly completed town square. There would be music and dancing, food and fireworks shipped all the way from Chicago. Sophia had attended such gatherings in previous years only briefly, fulfilling her civic duty before retreating to the solitude of her cabin. This year, however, Daniel asked if he might escort her. "I've been told I'm a passable dancer," he said with that smile that never failed to warm her. "Though I can't promise not to step on your toes." Against her better judgment, she accepted. When he arrived at her cabin that evening, freshly shaved and wearing a crisp white shirt with his best denims, Sophia felt a flutter of something that might have been happiness. The town square was transformed by lanterns and bunting, tables laden with food contributed by the townspeople, a small band assembled on a makeshift stage. Daniel guided her through the crowd with a gentle hand at her elbow, introducing her to neighbors she knew only by sight and settlers from outlying farms who rarely came to town. "Miss Turner runs our library," he would tell them, his voice filled with pride as if her accomplishment somehow reflected on him. "She's the most knowledgeable person in Rawlins about literature and science both." His admiration embarrassed and pleased her in equal measure. "Mr. Sinclair exaggerates," she would demur, but Daniel would shake his head. "I've never been one for embellishment, Miss Turner, just stating facts as I see them." When the music began, he led her to the dancing area, his hand warm around hers. "I should warn you," she said nervously, "I haven't danced in years." "Then we'll learn together," he replied, placing his other hand at her waist. They moved awkwardly at first, both too conscious of the other's proximity. But as the music continued, they found a rhythm together, turning beneath the star-filled Wyoming sky while lantern light cast their shadows across the packed earth. "You're full of surprises, Miss Turner," Daniel said as the song ended. "You dance beautifully." "As do you, Mr. Sinclair," she returned, breathless not from exertion but from the intensity of his gaze. "For a man who spends his days digging in the earth." He laughed, the sound rich and unrestrained. "Perhaps we both contain multitudes, as Mr. Whitman would say." The reference to the poet surprised and delighted her. "You've read Whitman. Leaves of Grass kept me company during many solitary nights," he admitted, "though I suspect some would consider it improper reading." "It's magnificent work," she said, forgetting for a moment to maintain her usual reserve. "The way he captures the essence of America, the vastness and possibility of it." Daniel's expression softened. "That's precisely what I love about it. The recognition that we're all part of something larger, connected to the land and to each other." They might have continued this conversation, but the band struck up another tune, and couples around them resumed dancing. Daniel extended his hand in silent invitation, and Sophia accepted, allowing herself to be drawn once more into his arms. As the evening progressed, Sophia found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of celebration and company. When the fireworks began, Daniel led her to a quiet spot at the edge of the square, where they could watch the brilliant explosions of color against the night sky. "Beautiful," she murmured as golden sparkles cascaded downward. "Yes," Daniel agreed, but when she turned, she found him looking not at the fireworks but at her. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Sophia felt herself leaning toward him almost imperceptibly, drawn by some force she couldn't name. Daniel's gaze dropped to her lips, his intention clear in the slight tilt of his head. Fear lanced through her, sharp and familiar. She stepped back abruptly. "It's getting late," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "I should go home." Disappointment flickered across his features before he schooled his expression. "Of course, may I walk you home?" "No," she said too quickly. "No, thank you, I need some air, some time alone." Without waiting for his response, she turned and hurried away, hating herself for the hurt she'd seen in his eyes but terrified of the feelings he awakened in her. Back in her cabin, Sophia paced the small room, angry at her own weakness. This was precisely why she'd kept herself apart from others, to avoid the messiness of emotions, the inevitable pain of attachment. Daniel Sinclair, with his dreams and his gentle hands, was a complication she couldn't afford. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make it clear that their relationship could be nothing more than friendly acquaintances. She would be polite but distant, would discourage his daily visits to the library, would decline any further invitations to his farm. But when morning came, Daniel didn't appear at the library, nor the next day or the one after that. A week passed with no sign of him, and Sophia found herself watching the door with increasing anxiety, wondering if her abrupt departure had offended him beyond reconciliation. The thought shouldn't have bothered her. Wasn't this exactly what she'd wanted? Distance, safety from emotional entanglement. Yet she found herself unable to concentrate on her work, her mind constantly returning to memories of Daniel's smile, his voice, the feel of his hand at her waist as they danced beneath the stars. On the 8th day, just as she was closing the library, the door opened to admit not Daniel but Sarah Jenkins, the wife of one of the local ranchers. "Miss Turner," Mrs. Jenkins said breathlessly, "I've been looking all over town for you." Sophia felt a chill of premonition. "What is it?" "What's happened? It's Mr. Sinclair, Daniel. There was an accident at his place. The well he was digging collapsed. They've taken him to Doc Miller's, but it doesn't look good." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet. Without conscious thought, she was grabbing her shawl and rushing past Mrs. Jenkins, her heart pounding a desperate rhythm against her ribs. The short distance to the doctor's house had never seemed so vast. She burst through the door without knocking, startling the doctor's wife, who was preparing bandages in the front room. "Daniel Sinclair," Sophia gasped. "Where is he?" Mrs. Miller's expression softened with understanding. "Back room, dear. The doctor's with him now." Sophia moved past her, pausing at the threshold of the sick room. Daniel lay motionless on a narrow bed, his face ashen beneath the tan, a bandage wrapped around his head. Dr. Miller looked up from examining Daniel's ribs, his expression grave. "Miss Turner," he acknowledged. "I'm afraid Mr. Sinclair is in serious condition. Several broken ribs, a concussion, and his right leg was badly crushed in the collapse." "Will he—" She couldn't finish the question, fear closing her throat. The doctor sighed. "If infection doesn't set in, he has a chance. But the next few days will be critical, and even if he recovers—" He glanced at Daniel's leg. "He may never walk properly again." Sophia moved to the bedside, her eyes taking in Daniel's still form. His breathing was shallow, his usually animated face unnaturally slack. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, finding it cold to the touch. "May I stay with him?" she asked, not looking up. "There's nothing you can do that I'm not already doing," Dr. Miller said, not unkindly. "Please." She finally raised her gaze to meet the doctor's. I need to be here." Something in her expression must have convinced him. "Very well. You can help Mrs. Miller change the bandages and keep him cool if fever develops. But don't expect any response from him for a while. The laudanum will keep him unconscious through the worst of the pain." After the doctor left, Sophia pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, still holding Daniel's hand. In the quiet room, with only the sound of his breathing for company, she finally confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved him. Loved his quiet strength and gentle humor, his patience and determination, his vision of beauty in a harsh land. Loved him with a depth that terrified her precisely because it was real, not a fairy tale or a romantic fancy, but a bone-deep recognition of something essential to her own happiness. And now, having finally admitted this truth to herself, she might lose him before ever having the chance to tell him. You can't die, she whispered fiercely, squeezing his unresponsive hand. Do you hear me, Daniel Sinclair? You have an orchard to grow, you made a promise. Days blurred together as Sophia maintained her vigil. She left only to change her clothes and open the library for a few hours each afternoon, returning to Daniel's bedside as soon as her duties allowed. She read to him from books she brought from the library, poetry, adventure tales, and passages about apple cultivation that she hoped might reach him even in unconsciousness. On the third night, fever took hold. Sophia and Mrs. Miller worked tirelessly, bathing Daniel's burning skin with cool water, forcing small sips of broth between his cracked lips when he showed moments of semi-consciousness. You should rest, Mrs. Miller told her as dawn broke after their long night's work. You'll make yourself ill carrying on this way. Sophia shook her head, wringing out another cloth to place on Daniel's forehead. I can't leave him. The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. You love him. It wasn't a question, but Sophia answered anyway. Yes. Saying it aloud felt like jumping from a great height, terrifying and freeing at once. Mrs. Miller nodded as if confirming something she'd long suspected. Then tell him. Even if you think he can't hear you, sometimes the voice of someone beloved can guide a soul back from the darkness. Left alone with Daniel once more, Sophia gathered her courage. I don't know if you can hear me, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But there are things I need to say, things I should have told you before. She told him about her mother's death and her father's subsequent decline, about the walls she'd built around her heart out of fear and self-preservation. She told him how his daily visits to the library had become the center of her days, how his vision of an orchard in the Wyoming wilderness had awakened something long dormant within her. I've been afraid my whole life, she admitted, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Afraid to hope, afraid to love, afraid to believe in anything I couldn't hold in my hands. But you plant trees that won't bear fruit for years. You see possibility where others see only hardship. You've shown me what courage truly means. She pressed his hand to her wet cheek. Please don't leave me just when I've found the courage to stay. Whether it was her words, the doctor's care, or simply Daniel's own stubborn will to live, the fever broke that night. By morning, his breathing had eased and color had begun to return to his face. When he finally opened his eyes late that afternoon, Sophia was dozing in the chair beside him, her hand still clasping his. The slight pressure of his fingers tightening around hers roused her. She looked up to find him watching her, his gaze weak but aware. Sophia, he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Don't try to talk, she urged, reaching for the water glass on the bedside table. You've been very ill. He accepted a few sips of water before speaking again. How long? 4 days, she told him. The well collapsed on you. Do you remember? He frowned, then winced as the movement caused pain. Vaguely. Everything after is fragments, your voice, stories. His gaze sharpened. You were reading to me. Yes. She felt suddenly self-conscious, wondering how much else he might have heard during her emotional confession. I thought it might help. It did. He squeezed her hand again. You were my anchor. Dr. Miller's arrival interrupted whatever else Daniel might have said. The physician examined him thoroughly, pronouncing himself cautiously optimistic about the recovery but warning that the damaged leg would require significant time to heal, if it ever did fully. You're looking at months of recuperation, Mr. Sinclair, the doctor said bluntly. And you'll need help. Do you have family who can come? Daniel shook his head slightly. No family, but I'll manage. You most certainly will not manage alone, Sophia said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. Not with a farm to run. Orchard, Daniel corrected with a ghost of his usual smile. Orchard, she agreed, returning his smile despite the tears threatening again. Which needs tending if those saplings are to survive the summer. In the end, it was decided that Daniel would stay at the doctor's house until he was strong enough to be moved, and then arrangements would be made for his ongoing care. Sophia continued her daily visits, now welcomed by a conscious and increasingly alert patient who clearly looked forward to her arrival. 2 weeks after the accident, Daniel was deemed well enough to return to his cabin, though still unable to walk without assistance and forbidden from any strenuous activity for at least another month. The question remains, Dr. Miller said, who will look after him out there? It's too isolated for daily visits, and he'll need help with everything from cooking to tending his livestock. I'll do it, Sophia said before she could reconsider. Both men looked at her in surprise. Miss Turner, the doctor began cautiously, while your dedication is admirable, it wouldn't be appropriate for an unmarried woman to stay alone with Mr. Sinclair, even in a caregiving capacity. The town would talk. Then we'll marry, Daniel said quietly. Sophia's heart stopped, then resumed at a gallop. What? Daniel's gaze was steady despite the pain lines etched around his eyes. Marry me, Sophia, not out of pity or obligation, but because I've loved you since the day you helped me find that book on irrigation systems. Because I want to plant orchards and build a life with you. Because every sunrise I've seen since meeting you has been more beautiful for the hope that I might share it with you someday. She stared at him, speechless, her carefully ordered world tilting once again. I know it's sudden, he continued, misinterpreting her silence. And I'm hardly at my best right now. If you need time to consider, yes, she interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. Yes, I'll marry you. The joy that transformed his face in that moment was worth every fear she'd overcome to reach this point. Dr. Miller cleared his throat, looking both embarrassed and pleased. Well, I suppose that settles it. I'll speak to Reverend Thompson about performing the ceremony as soon as possible. 3 days later, in the doctor's front parlor with only the Millers and Reverend Thompson in attendance, Sophia Turner became Sophia Sinclair. She wore her blue Sunday dress with wildflowers in her hair. Daniel stood with the aid of crutches, his face pale with the effort but radiant with happiness as they spoke their vows. I promise to nurture what grows between us with the same patience and faith you give to your trees, Sophia told him when it came time for her to speak. To believe in possibilities I cannot yet see, and to face whatever seasons come with courage because we face them together. Daniel's voice was steady despite his weakened state. I promise to show you every day that love is not a fairy tale but something real and enduring. To create a home where hope flourishes and dreams take root. To cherish you through sunshine and storm until my last breath. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when Daniel kissed her a gentle, reverent meeting of lips that promised more when health allowed, Sophia felt the last of her protective walls crumble away. That evening, they traveled to Daniel's cabin, now their home, in Dr. Miller's wagon. The journey was difficult for Daniel, each jolt causing pain despite the careful driving, but he refused to show it, his focus entirely on Sophia's comfort. Are you sure about this? He asked as they approached the cabin, visible now in the golden light of sunset. It's not much compared to what you might have had back east. Sophia looked at the small structure nestled against the backdrop of Wyoming's vast landscape, at the newly planted orchard beyond, at the man beside her who had risked everything on a dream of growing beauty in harsh terrain. It's everything, she said simply, and knew it for truth. The following weeks were a time of adjustment and learning. Sophia continued her work at the library, arranging for a local girl to cover the hours when she needed to be at the farm. She learned to care for the horses and chickens, to tend the vegetable garden Daniel had started, and most importantly, to irrigate the young apple trees that required constant attention during the hot summer months. Daniel, for his part, was a difficult patient not because he complained, but because he constantly pushed himself beyond what his healing body could endure. Sophia found herself acting as both nurse and voice of reason, insisting on rest when he would have worked himself to exhaustion. "The orchard will still be there tomorrow," she would tell him firmly when she found him attempting tasks the doctor had forbidden. "But if you re-injure yourself, you'll only prolong your recovery." "I'm not accustomed to idleness," he would grumble, but allow her to guide him back to the porch rocker or the bed they now shared. Their physical relationship developed slowly, constrained at first by Daniel's injuries and their mutual inexperience. But as summer waned and his strength returned, they discovered in each other a passion neither had expected, learning together the language of touch and intimacy that transformed their small cabin into a sanctuary of tenderness. By September, Daniel was walking with only a slight limp, though the doctor warned he would likely always carry that reminder of the accident. The saplings had survived the summer heat, their leaves beginning to turn golden as autumn approached. Sophia had made the cabin truly a home, adding shelves for their combined book collection, curtains at the windows, and small touches that reflected both their tastes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and amber, Daniel took her hand. "Are you happy, Sophia Sinclair?" She considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "I am," she said finally. "Not in the way of fairy tales with magical transformations and perfect endings, but in a way that feels authentic, rooted in something real." He smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "That's all I've ever wanted, something real and lasting, like these trees we're growing. They'll outlive us both, God willing. Our legacy," she mused, resting her head against his shoulder, "though perhaps not our only one." Daniel turned to look at her, a question in his eyes. "I believe," Sophia said carefully, joy bubbling beneath her measured words, "that next spring will bring new life to Sinclair Orchard beyond apple blossoms." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by wonder and delight. "A child." "You're certain?" she nodded, laughing as he gathered her in a careful embrace. "As certain as one can be this early. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday." "A family," Daniel murmured against her hair. "Our family." He pulled back to look into her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Sophia, for trusting me with your heart, for believing in what we could build together." "You made it easy," she told him, cupping his face in her hands. "You showed me every day that love isn't just a pretty story in a book, it's work and patience and faith. It's planting seeds without certainty, but with hope for what might grow." As darkness fell over the Wyoming plains, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the child that would join them in spring, of the first apple harvest still years away, of the life they would build season by season in this land of harsh beauty and boundless possibility. That night, as Sophia drifted toward sleep in Daniel's arms, she thought of the woman she had been just months before, alone and armored against hurt, believing love to be a luxury she could not afford, a fairy tale for those more fortunate or more foolish than herself. How wrong she had been. Love wasn't a fairy tale, it was better. It was real, with all the complexity and challenge that reality entailed. It was Daniel's arms around her each night and his kiss each morning. It was the shared labor of creating something that would outlast them both. It was the child growing beneath her heart, a tangible manifestation of what they had found in each other. The seasons turned, bringing change and growth to Sinclair Orchard. Winter came early that year, blanketing the land in snow that transformed the bare branches of the young apple trees into crystalline sculptures. Sophia and Daniel spent the cold months planning expansions to the cabin, reading aloud by lamplight, and preparing for the child that would join them when spring returned to the Wyoming Territory. March brought not only the first signs of thaw, but also their son, Samuel Daniel Sinclair, born during a gentle snowfall that heralded winter's end. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, entering the world with a lusty cry that made Dr. Miller laugh. "A strong boy," the physician pronounced as he placed the swaddled infant in Sophia's arms. "He'll be helping with the harvest before you know it." Daniel, who had paced anxiously throughout the long labor, sat beside Sophia on the bed, his expression one of awe as he gazed at his wife and child. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching a gentle finger to his son's tiny fist. "Absolutely perfect." As spring advanced, the apple trees burst into bloom, their delicate white and pink blossoms a striking contrast against the weathered landscape. Sophia often walked among them with Samuel cradled against her chest, telling him stories of how his father had planted each one with faith in a future he couldn't yet see. "Just as he believed in us," she would say softly, "long before I found the courage to believe myself." The saplings required constant attention that first full-year protection from late frosts, careful watering through the dry weeks of summer, vigilance against insects and disease. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, his limp more pronounced when he was tired, but never slowing his determined care of the emerging orchard. Sophia divided her time between the library, which she refused to abandon, despite her new responsibilities, and the increasing demands of the farm and family. She learned to balance Samuel on her hip while hanging laundry, to complete the library's monthly reports during his afternoon naps, to cook and clean and tend to her husband's still healing body with an efficiency born of necessity and love. They were not without challenges. Summer brought drought that threatened the young trees despite their careful irrigation system. Autumn saw an early snowstorm that damaged several of the more fragile saplings. Winter brought illness, first Samuel with a frightening fever that kept them awake for 3 straight nights, then Daniel with a respiratory infection that reminded them all too vividly of his vulnerability since the accident. Yet through each difficulty, their partnership deepened. Where once Sophia would have seen such trials as confirmation of life's inherent cruelty, she now recognized them as simply part of the rich tapestry of existence, darkness that made the light more precious, obstacles that made achievement more meaningful. By the time Samuel celebrated his first birthday, the orchard had survived its critical initial year. The trees, though still small, showed promising growth. The cabin had been expanded to include a proper bedroom for their son, and a larger kitchen, where Sophia experimented with recipes for the apples they would eventually harvest. Daniel had become known throughout the region for his innovative farming techniques, with settlers from miles around coming to see his irrigation system and terraced planting approach. Sophia had expanded the library's agricultural section and started a monthly discussion group where local farmers and ranchers could share knowledge, a community growing alongside their trees. On a warm evening in late May, as Samuel slept peacefully in his crib, Daniel and Sophia walked hand in hand through the orchard, inspecting the tiny fruits that had formed after that spring's blossoming the first apples their trees would produce, small and likely sour, but visible proof that their vision was becoming reality. "Do you remember what you told me that day in the library when I asked about growing apples in Wyoming?" Daniel asked, pausing beneath a tree whose branches now reached higher than their heads. Sophia smiled, the memory clear despite the passage of time. I believe I said the climate was better suited to hardier crops, that the books weren't optimistic about fruit trees in this soil. And yet, he gestured to the small green apples visible among the leaves, here we are. Here we are, she agreed, leaning into his embrace. Though I must admit, I still marvel at your persistence. Most men would have chosen an easier path. Daniel's laugh rumbled beneath her ear. I've never been interested in easy paths, only worthwhile ones. He tipped her face up to his. Like convincing the most beautiful, intelligent, skeptical woman in Wyoming Territory to take a chance on a broken-down veteran with impossible dreams. I believe you convinced me long before you realized it, she admitted. That day, we planted the first trees together, seeing how tenderly you placed each one in the earth, how you spoke to them as if they could understand your encouragement. I began to hope then that perhaps love could be something more than the tragic devotion I'd witnessed between my parents. And now, his question was soft against the backdrop of a Wyoming twilight, insects beginning their evening chorus around them. Sophia looked up at her husband, at the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and pain, at the steady gaze that had never wavered in its belief in her, in them, in the future they were building together. Now I know that love isn't a fairy tale, she said, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. It's better, it's real, and you prove it with every sunrise we share. They stood together as darkness settled over Sinclair Orchard, the lights of their cabin glowing in the distance like a beacon calling them home. Above them, stars emerged one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, witnesses to the miracle of patience rewarded, and faith justified not by magic or divine intervention, but by the steady, daily work of two people who had chosen to believe in possibilities unseen. In the years that followed, the orchard flourished beyond even Daniel's most optimistic predictions. By the time Samuel was 5, the trees were producing enough fruit for Sophia to begin selling apple preserves and pies in Rawlins. When their daughter Emma joined the family 2 years later, the orchard had expanded to include cherries and plums, transforming a once barren plot of Wyoming Territory into a verdant oasis that drew visitors from as far as Cheyenne. The library remained Sophia's passion, though she now shared duties with 2 younger women she had trained. The agricultural collection she had begun with Daniel became renowned throughout the territory, and the monthly discussion group evolved into an annual farming conference that brought progressive agricultural techniques to the region. Daniel's leg never fully healed, the limp remained, worsening in cold weather or when he pushed himself too hard. But he adapted, designing tools that compensated for his limitations and teaching Samuel and later Emma how to assist with tasks he could no longer perform alone. Together, the Sinclairs built not just an orchard but a legacy, a demonstration that, with sufficient vision, knowledge, and determination, the seemingly impossible could be achieved. Their story became something of a legend in Rawlins and beyond, not because it was a fairy tale of magical transformation, but precisely because it was a testament to what ordinary people could accomplish through extraordinary commitment. On their 20th anniversary, with the orchard in full production and their children nearly grown, Daniel presented Sophia with a book, a journal he had kept since their first meeting, documenting the growth of both their trees and their love, illustrated with pressed apple blossoms and sketches of the changing landscape. For the woman who taught me that the most valuable stories are the ones we write ourselves, he inscribed on the first page. With gratitude for every sunrise we've shared and every one still to come. Sophia, whose youthful conviction that love was mere fiction had long since been replaced by the deeper knowledge of love as daily practice, accepted the gift with tears and laughter, both the appropriate response. She thought, to the beautiful, complicated, entirely real fairy tale they had created together in the heart of the Wyoming wilderness.